Good morning, everyone. We'd like to welcome you to this Assa Abloy Academy presentation, Fundamentals of Hollow Metal Frames. Your lead instructor today will be Rose Cliff Olsen. I will be manning the chat, questions and answers. Your lines will be muted during the presentation. However, please use the Q&A feature at the bottom to ask your questions. We will be addressing your questions at the end of the session. The session is scheduled for an hour, and with question and answer, we should take about that long. At the end of the session, within 24 hours, you will receive an email. That email will be your proof of attending the class if you're using this for continuing education. There are also several upcoming classes over the next several weeks pertaining to hollow metal doors and frames and specialty products. We welcome you to partake in those, as well as any of the other upcoming virtual instructor-led training sessions. With that, I will welcome Rose, and you are in good hands.
Thank you, Tom. Good morning, everyone. This session is going to be a high-level overview of metal frames. With that said, if you are interested in doing a deeper dive into frames, and then later on this week I will be doing a 1-hour session on doors, please reach out to your local DSS rep or your regional business development person. We can get some more in-depth training sessions, Zoom sessions set up for you if you would like to do a little bit more deeper dive. So again, this is a 1-hour session. It's going to be a very high level view of metal frames, but hopefully you will take away some information that will be useful for you. Excuse me. With that, learning objectives, what we try to do in this session will give you some basic information about metal frames, some of the terminology that you will hear throughout your session here in this session, then and also in the real world, a lot of different terminology, and I will try to make sure that I let you know the various terminology. As you work in this industry, you will find out that depending on one person will call something, has a terminology for a particular hardware prep, where someone else may have a different terminology. So we'll try to give you as many examples of that as possible as we go through this session. Also, a lot of the benefits and features of metal frames, and then we will get into very brief about installation. And I'm also going to give you some resources to go in and look at installation of metal frames also. So with that, we just wanted to show you the Assa Abloy metal door companies that we have throughout the country. First one is going to be Seco Door. They're located in Milan, Tennessee. Both Seco and Curry's manufactures custom and standard metal frames. Curry's is located in Mason City, Iowa. Fleming is located in Ontario, California. Ontario, Canada. They basically make a paintable galvannealed product. And also it is, like I said, it's paintable, it's galvannealed. Pioneer is located in Carlstadt, New Jersey, one of our newer acquisitions. They also manufacture custom and metal frames. And then Concept is located in Newton, North Carolina. They really get into more custom frames, different types of side light, bar lights, and things like that. And then the newest acquisition is Styles out of Northern California, Ceres, California. They really get into more your custom built types of frames and window systems. So with that, we'll just dive right into metal frames. You'll see here we have a list. You'll see different types of frames that are profiles and designs that we have. Really, it's just going to depend on the type of project you have. For instance, we have our Curry's manufacturer can do over 400, or they have done over 400 different types of frame profiles. And Seco is not far behind. So we have a lot of different types of designs. Again, if there's something that's out of the ordinary, you really want to send it in to us to let us take a look at the design, look at dimensions on it to make sure that our equipment can actually form up that type of material. And here, this is just kind of give you a quick look at some of the more custom types of frames that we've done in the past. And all of these have been, with either Seco or Curry's on here. But it gives you an idea that we can do more than just standard three-sided frame. So we'll talk about metal frames and how they're put together. The first one, you have two ways a frame comes out of the factory. It is going to be KD. Some people call it KD. Some people say knockdown is what the designation is for, or three-piece frame, non-welded. This is a frame that's coming out in three pieces. With that, we have also, you can have the frame welded. And we're going to get into the various intricate details about whether it's KD frame, if it's drywall, or if it's a standard masonry frame KD, or if it's welded. But those are really your two types of designs that you will have. It will come out either KD, three pieces, or welded. And as you look at that three-piece KD detail there to the left, you'll see on the strike jam, it talks about strike jam or lock jam. So this will be your first kind of intro to different nomenclature for the same item. So a strike or lock jam, also on the strike, on that jam, the strike prep in that jam. Sometimes you'll hear it referred to as ASA, ANSI, 4 7/8, universal. It's all the same thing. It's a 4 7/8 strike cut out in that jam with a box behind it. And that box helps prevent when it's grouted, or if you have electrical type hardware, to house that in that strike section. So with that, you'll look at the detail to the right there, welded. We have a couple different types of way you can weld a frame, and we'll get into that a little bit more detail here in just a minute. But the one thing I want you to look at is the shipping brace. Some people refer to it as a spreader bar. This is designed to help that frame go from point A to point B without twisting and racking. The shipping brace is not designed to help set that frame and square it up. So the installer should knock that off before he sets that frame and tries to square it up. So with that, we'll talk about our first type of construction on the frame is a KD construction. You'll see the detail to the right there. It has, on the head, it has slots. On the jam, it has tabs on this. So in actuality, this frame can be put together in the field. You have to bend the tabs the correct way to close up that miter on the header of the frame. But with that, on a KD construction, and if it's a masonry frame, 9 times out of 10, that frame is going to go out to the job site welded. And the reason is, throughout years and years, a lot of these frames were shipped out to the job site. It was the installer had to be someone who really understood metal frames, installing in the proper way, bending the tabs the proper way. What we found was a lot of times these frames were being installed and they weren't being installed correctly. The miter corner had a gap between your head and your jam. If that masonry frame is installed, unless you're going to rip it out of that wall, it's really no way to fix that. So over the years, basically the industry has gone to a masonry frame, goes out to the job site, welded, their corners welded. And then we also talk about a true drywall frame, and we're going to get into that also, but that type of frame is designed for interior application. Right now we're talking about an exterior type of frame, or a frame that's going into, say, like a retail space where you have exterior openings and then you have the frames that are inside that retail space. Those all will be welded type of frames. So when we talk about the different types of welds on the frame, you have one here that is the seam welded, and you'll see it still has the tabs and the slots in there. But basically what we do is we weld the corners, and we grind it down, and then we prime paint it or dress it. Now this type of welding can be done at the factory, it can be done at the distributor, and if it really absolutely came down to it, it could be done in the field. When you order material from the factory, quite a high percentage of it is going to come out of the factory KD or in 3 pieces. And it's simply because of cost. If you have a KD or knockdown frame, you could ship, say, in a full truck like 1,000 frames. If they're welded, you maybe get 350 in that truck. So again, if it's welded, you're going to be paying a lot of air on that truck. So most of the frames, regardless what they are, going to come out KD from the factory, and then either the service center or the distributor will weld it. So this type of weld, what we call as WGS, welded and ground smooth, is your most common. Probably 98% of the time frames go out, you'll see it as a WGS. And if your customer says he wants a welded frame, this is the type of weld. If he doesn't specify and he just says welded, you want to give him just the standard weld that your shop guy or the service center can do. The other type of weld is where you'll see in specifications where they are concerned with sanitation, where there's a lot of moisture around, and they will call it out as a back welded. Sometimes you'll hear it specified or see it specified as a continuously back welded frame. That terminology is what you want to look for when you're looking at how should I be pricing up this frame. So if it's a continuously back welded or fully back welded frame, they're asking for not only the corners to be welded, but the full depth and width of that frame to be welded in the back. Therefore, you will not have any seams on that frame up underneath. If you look up under where the head and the jambs meet, that seam there, you won't have that because that's a fully welded. Again, you'll see that in sometimes specified hospitals, a lot of times where there's a lot of water, whether it's clean rooms, where they're going to hose down that room every night, sanitary reason where it's like food processing plants, chemical areas, you may see the spec calling for a fully back welded or continuously back welded frame. The cost is more than your standard face weld, so I point that out because there's quite a bit of a difference in the price. The other type of weld that we have is a saw miter. Where you see this type of weld is if it's a special type of configuration, or if you're a distributor, has a shop, and you have a customer that wants 1 bar of light. You have the material in your shop in stick sections rather. So your shop guy will take that, say, 10-foot piece of stick, cut it, and then weld it. There's no tabs and slot to it because he's taken it right out of inventory. Sometimes depending on the profile, depending on the detail of the frame, even from the factory, we have to saw miter that material. For instance, if you get into 12 gauge material, there won't be any tabs and slots on a 12 gauge material. Because of the thickness of the steel, we can't do that type of tabs and slots on that material, so it will have to be more of a saw miter type of construction. Here we get into what we call a true KD interior drywall frame. With this type of frame, it is a type that has its own anchoring system, which is called a compression anchor, which we'll get into that a little bit later. But just remember, on a KD drywall construction, it is not designed to be welded. It is designed that the wall is up and you slide the header and the side jambs around the drywall itself. It is attached to the stud with that compression anchor at the top on both jambs. And then at the bottom of the jamb, we have at the face sides, we have countersunk holes where the jamb at the bottom can be anchored to the wall at the bottom. So again, this type of frame, drywall construction, KD, is not designed for heavy usage, exterior application, things like that. This is interior material only. So with that said, we'll kind of dive into a little bit of the frame terminologies here. The face of the frame, industry standard is 2-inch. If you get a customer that sends you in an order and says, I want a 307, 05 3/4 frame, and he doesn't reference to the face dimension, industry standard is you're going to give him 2 inches on that face dimension. Now, we can have all different types of face dimensions. It's going to depend on what your customer is looking for. Outside of the 2-inch, anything else, there is an additional charge for that. At the top right, you'll see the stop. Stop height in our industry is 5/8 high. Again, if that's not specified, the material that you would get either from your inventory or the service center or from the factory is going to be 5/8 unless you specify otherwise. Integral versus removable stops. Integral stop is what you see is that detail there. It is part of the frame itself. Removable would be a stop that is applied to the frame rabbet where you're going to house glass in. So that stop needs to be up against the glass to help hold it in place. At the bottom right, you'll see rabbet terminology. This is part of the frame where we cut in for the hinges and for the strike. So with that, we have two different types of rabbeted material. We have unequal rabbet and equal rabbet. The unequal rabbeted is one dimension is 1 15/16. The other side is 1 9/16. So they're unequal. Factories, that is their standard. That is what you find standard most likely in all of the service centers and distributors. Inventory is unequal rabbeted material. With that, the factories design an unequal rabbeted to house either 1 3/8 or 1 3/4 frame, door. When you're ordering frames, even if you're not ordering the doors from the factory, you have to let us know what the size of the thickness of that door is. If it's 1 3/4, we're going to put the 4.5-inch hinge preps, the 4 7/8 strike on the wider side. If, however, you're using an 1 3/8 door, we're going to put that 3.5 hinge on the smaller side and that 2 3/4 strike on the smaller side. This allows us to have one type of frame for two types of door thickness. Equal rabbet is both rabbets' dimensions are 1 15/16. This allows, the most common will be for modification. So say that you ordered a frame and we're going to say that your customer gave you the incorrect handing. You order that material, you bring it in. If it's equal rabbet and it's the wrong handing, you can actually blank out the one side and cut in the other on the other rabbet because it's 1 15/16. So it's great for modification. Another reason is some architects like the look of the equal rabbet because both rabbets are the same dimension. We get into your return part of the frame. Again, it returns into the frame. You'll see your return legs on your masonry type. And again, in the industry, standard is a 1/2 inch on each side. The exception, and there's always an exception in commercial metal doors and frames, is that on 5 3/4 masonry frame, that return leg is going to be 7/16. And years ago, our standard wall, more common wall size was a 4 7/8 wall. That was a 3 5/8 metal stud, 5/8 drywall on each side. So they accommodated that, which was the most common. We have not changed that in the industry as a whole. So you want to be aware of that. Now, the other thing is you want to be aware of is what your specification is calling for. Just because that's something that we have as an industry standard does not mean that that's what your architect is going to be drawing out. So always look at what that return leg is on your door schedule. The other is your back bend. The back bend, it backs into the frame. Traditionally, you will see a back bend on frames for the interior drywall frames. Again, they're sliding over that drywall. That back bend piece of the frame allows when you slide it over, it does not gouge out the wall. One thing you want to be aware of is the detail on the left there, your jamb depth versus your throat opening size. Anything other than 5 3/4 masonry in your jamb depth, if the wall size or throat size is one dimension, you have to allow 1 inch to accommodate each return leg, 1/2 inch, 1/2 inch. That gives you your jamb depth. As a caution, always make sure when you're talking to your customer, is he giving you the dimension for your throat size or the wall size, or is he giving you the overall frame width? Example, when I worked for a distributor years ago, was talking to my customer and he was giving me these dimensions. I did not stop to ask, hey, is this your wall size or are you giving me the overall frame size you want to be ordered? With that, I assumed that he was giving me the frame width. Well, that was incorrect. He was giving me his wall size. So frames came in, they were the wrong size. So it is important to always clarify that dimension that your customer is giving you. You talk about, we have the soffit is your detail to the right there. The soffit of the frame will fluctuate depending on the jamb depth of the frame. So if you have, like it shows there for 5 3/4, you have your, with deleting or reducing the rabbet sizes, I guess you want to say, you come up with your soffit dimension. So if you had a frame, like for instance, Curry's can do a 26-inch wide frame. The soffit will be really quite wide, but those rabbets will always stay consistent, whether they're equal or unequal rabbeted material. Here's some other frame terminology. Whether you're looking at a standard 3-sided frame or a transom sidelight, as you see this detail here, really it takes up 2 different types of components. You have your open section, which you'll see it comprises the head, the side, the sill section, the hinge side, or your mullion section. And the mullion section, as you look at that, it does look like it's a one-piece product, but it isn't. It is actually 2 pieces. They're slid together to make up this design. That's where you have to house, the glass has to have a stop on one side. The door has to have a stop on the other side to close up against. Therefore, you'll see your mullion that has 2 stops to it. Some other type of terminology we have here is your side light to the left there, transom frames. We have transom side lights. Again, the detail at the top right there, we call that a corner 90-degree unit. The corner post in there allows that you can take that frame at a 90-degree. Now that corner post is not meant to be where the weight of that wall is on that. It is strictly designed for the glass to be able to go at a 90-degree. We have borrowed lights, whether they have mullions in them or they're just standard. And again, the light is being borrowed from the other side. They can have mullions, without mullions, all various face dimensions. And again, these are just different types of terminology that you will hear out in the industry. With the different types of profiles, here I just wanted to kind of show you the frame profiles that are more standard in the industry and what Seco and Curry's nomenclature is for these different types of profiles. So you have your double rabbeted, whether it's equal or unequal rabbeted material. Your double egress, you'll see there. This type of frame you will see in corridors where the door is set back into a pocket. This type of profile, or sometimes is referred to as step down profile, is going to be this is the way it's made throughout the industry. Your cased or trimmed opening, a lot of times you'll hear cased opening where it does not have a stop on it. Example would be in a restaurant where that door swings into the kitchen area. Somebody's coming out of the kitchen, out into the dining area, it swings the other direction. With that type of action, you cannot have a stop on that frame. So we have double acting hinges on that to allow that door to swing back and forth. Sometimes you'll hear this type of frame terminology as a trimmed opening. You're going from room to room. You don't need a door in that opening, so you're just going to trim out the opening. So there's where that terminology comes from. Your drywall types of frames you have, again, look at the back bend on the frame. And then we have your single rabbet. Your single rabbet comes into play. Sometimes architects like the look of a single rabbeted frame with that design. The other is for manufacturing consideration. When we get below, I believe it is 4.5-inch jam depth frame, it's very difficult for the manufacturers to make that smaller frame, especially when you get down to 3-inch or 3.5. We can only make that with a single rabbet because our equipment does not allow us, and you don't have enough room to form up 2 rabbets and still have a stop on that frame. So with that, the double egress frame, as I talked about, it is corridor. It also helps with the direction of traffic and things like that. With the double egress material, it is fire rated, either 1.5 hours or 3 hours. The type of hardware that you will see on this will be either surface vertical rod or concealed vertical rod. And so that's the type of hardware that goes on this. Again, it's in long corridors. Sometimes you hear people call it a barrier because once the doors, if power is cut from that opening, the doors will close and latch. And it helps with the barrier with the smoke and the fire raging down long corridors. Here, just kind of showing you some pictures of the different types of frames. So you have your double egress. And again, if you look closely in that detail to the left, you'll see that the stop is on this side for the door that's in the open position right now. And the stop is on the other side for the other door. Again, allowing the doors to swing in the corridor. Cased opening, as we talked about, no stop on the frame. Again, with this is a detail. Again, you see it in some bathrooms where you have maybe push pulls, things like that is where you'll see a cased opening frame. Hospital stop, just wanted you to know about this. It's a what sometimes is classified or terminology as a terminated stop type of frame. Hospitals, of course, really you'll see this type of frame in applications where they are very concerned about dirt, bacteria, anything forming up in the corners of that rabbet. So what they'll do is we'll terminate it either 6 or 4 inches above the frame, at the bottom of the frame, weld in a plate, and then it makes the bottom of that frame, whether it's 4 or 6 inches, very smooth. If they're mopping or whatever else, it goes right past there. You don't have a stop there. In the gauges of the frames, you'll see we have 18 all the way to 12 gauge. I caution you, even though we show 18 gauge here, even if you look into either Seco or Curry's price book, you'll see 18 gauge frames. I caution you not to use 18 gauge frames. Really, our industry starts off as a standard with 16 gauge. That's what you have in your inventory. If you inventory material, the service center, the factory starts off with 16 gauge. That is really the industry standard as far as your day in and day out type of gauge. Your 14 gauge, you'll see that more in your more heavy duty commercial, schools, hospitals, things like that. 12 gauge, more your security, bank, vault areas, de-escalation areas in, say, a police station, holding areas. Those types of applications or high security you're going to see for a 12 gauge frame. Here just kind of gives you details about the gauges of the frame. This is a very good visual. It kind of shows you the various gauges that we have within our industry and the thickness of them. So again, as I talked about earlier, on the 12 gauge frame, you'll see the thickness of that versus 18 or 16 gauge. So with that, the 12 gauge, again, you won't have tabs and slot in it because of the thickness of that steel. Then we get into the various types of steel that we have out there, whether it's CRS, cold rolled, G for galvanized, or A designation for galvannealed. So we're going to walk through these types of steels that are in the industry. So the first one you see to the far left there is going to be your cold rolled, or you'll see it designated as CRS. Basically, there's no zinc on this steel. A lot of times you'll see component parts that are made up of the CRS material. Primer and paint adheres very well to cold rolled material. And you usually see cold rolled material specified in interior applications. The next one is your G designated galvanized material. This is what we call the hot dipped process. Basically, with the galvanized material, really what they do is they put it in, they dip the steel in this zinc, and so it covers both sides of the steel, and they bring it out. So it's a continuous hot dip process, and then they let it dry. With that, you'll get this high spangled look, like ductwork, garbage can types of steel, very spangled looking. With that process though, the difficult comes into being able to weld that material. Paint, primer doesn't adhere to it as well as what it would with cold rolled or CRS material. And again, even though our factories have G material inventory, where if the job calls for it, just be aware that galvanized material is going to be a lot more difficult to modify and have paint adhere to it. The A galvannealed material is what you will see day in and day out in specs in our industry. And with the A, basically the galvannealed, it is a hot dip process, but then we have a further heat treatment of this material. So with that said, it's easier to modify, it's easier to paint, and primer will adhere to it a whole lot better than your G or galvanized material. Here, it just kind of gives you the coating designation. So we talked about the A and the G because the G is going to be your galvanized, the A is your galvannealed material. Then we come down to the coating weight. So the A40, the A60, or the G90, basically this is telling you how much zinc per square foot of material on both sides of the steel, of the zinc that you have. So on the A40, basically telling you you have 0.4 ounces of zinc per square foot of material on both sides. So you got 0.2 on both sides, making the total thickness 4 ounces. A60 is 6 ounces, so you've got more zinc per square foot of material. The G90 is going to be even more, but again, the downside with the G90 is we don't keep a lot of that in inventory, and the difficulty with welding and modifying that product. So if you have a spec that calls for A40, what you're going to give them will be A60. Right now with Seco and Curry's, they have A60 is their standard galvanized material. Then we get into stainless steel material. Again, with the stainless steel, a lot of times people are like, I want stainless steel, until you give them a price and it's like, well, maybe not stainless. How about we go to galvanized? With stainless steel material, though, there are different types of applications where it is just required for stainless steel material. Chemical storage areas, where there's a lot of water. Say you have a project that has it's a food processing plant. That is one place where you definitely don't want to worry about anything adhering to the material. So you'll see a lot of times that's called for as stainless steel. Where you have like a lab where they're hosing down that room every night, you will see those openings specified as stainless steel. And then you drill down to that a little bit more and you get into 304 versus 316 stainless. In the specifications, more than likely, you're going to see a 304 stainless steel specified on the steel type. You will see 316. The 316 is sometimes referred to as marine grade. The 316 basically has more chromium in the steel. This allows for that 316 stainless steel material to, with the corrosion, doesn't affect it as much. So that corrosion process slows down more so than the 304. So if you've got an area where there's a lot of corrosive material, chemical plants, things like that, and those rooms in that area, most likely you're going to see the 316 specified, just because the chromium is higher and it's more highly corrosive resistant than your 304. And then the different finishes you'll see there, again, you'll need to make sure that what is in the spec so that you can price accordingly. And then we have metal frames as far as protective coatings with the different types of, if you don't specify anything and you just order a standard frame, it's going to have standard factory primer finish on it. And for the most part, a lot of the specifications will call for, whatever the factory standard primer is. But there are situations where you may need to have different types of primer rather than just our standard factory primer. So a couple of examples here is your red oxide primer may be a type of primer that will be specified, or your zinc rich, which you've got a lot more zinc in that primer for corrosive areas. So you want to be aware of, don't always just assume that the spec is going to call for just standard factory primer. Where there's a lot of moisture, where there's a lot of corrosive environment, you may see these different types of primers specified. And please be aware of that because there is an additional cost to that. Bituminous coating is the detail there at the top right. Years ago, probably 10, 12 years ago, if you looked at a specification and it called for bituminous coating on these frames because they're going to be grouted, they wanted some sort of coating in the back of the frame to help slow the rust process from the inside out of that frame, the factory and the distributor would say that's got to be done in the field. We exclude that from our scope of our bid because that material was so toxic that nobody wanted to touch that. Over the last 7, 8, 9 years, the industry has come out with a water-based, environmentally friendly type of bituminous coating. It can be used on fire-rated or non-rated frames, 3-sided frame, bar lights, side lights, welded KD. You can actually put this coating if you have a shop, your shop guy can actually put this material in the back of the frame to coat the frame. And then with different types of installation for your masonry frame, again, this slide is just showing you that a masonry frame is set, they square it up, and they then build their walls to the frame. And along with the walls, they have to also install anchors. And we'll talk about that here in just a second. The one thing I just wanted to bring to your attention is that if you're doing a project and you see that they're asking for 4-inch face headers, if it's a 7.0 frame, more than likely, and if it's going in a block wall, they're going to request a 4-inch face header. And the reason is that with the 4-inch face header, it's going to help them as they build that wall, so they don't have to stop. And if they if you supply just a 2-inch face header, you'll see that as they're building this wall, they've got to stop, they've got to cut the block, they've got to sandwich it above. That's time and money. So on 7.0s, you will see them, if it's in block exterior application, you will see it with that 4-inch face header. This next couple slides is just an overview of installation on masonry frames. And with this, you'll see I have reference SDI 110-18. That is the Steel Door Institute. If you are not familiar with that website, and it's steeldoor.org is the website for it, it has a tremendous amount of information on there for you. It references all of our different types of standards that we have to comply with that you'll see in the specifications, whether that's the different type, the anchors, or the different type of primer, you know, all of these types of things under SDI is where it's more like our Bible, our guideline, as far as our standard doors and frames. They have information on there on fire rating. It has information on troubleshooting for installation. So if you have someone calling you and asking about, hey, this frame is installed, but the door is hitting, when we hang the door, it's hitting at the top or bottom. We have a guide as far as troubleshooting, and all of that is found on the steeldoor.org website. This again is just kind of showing you if you're wrapping the wall versus what we call butting the frame up against the wall. The one thing I always look at, try to see, is if we can have, the application will be to butt the frame up against the wall. And the upside to that is that depending on the size, you can pretty much possibly be able to pull from inventory if it's butted up against the wall. If it's wrapping, as you see the detail to the left, then you're going to have to know the exact size of that wall. And sometimes it's not going to be a standard size. So therefore, it becomes a custom product. Here are the various types of anchors for the masonry frame. The three that are common that you will see day in and day out for new construction will be your masonry wire. It's spring-loaded into the back of the frame. It's probably the most standard type of anchor you'll see specified for new construction because it is flexible enough to open up to various jam depths. The other one is just below it, the masonry strap and stirrup. Of new construction type of anchors, this is the one that's welded in. What this does is it provides that if that frame is going to the job site with the strap anchor, it can't grow legs and walk off the job site. So it's in that frame, it's welded into the back of the frame. You see the leg there, it can adjust depending on where you need it to be sandwiched in between the block. The other type of new construction anchor is the T-anchor, and you'll see it there. You'll see the head of it is cut out. This allows for, if that frame is going to be grouted, then the grout can flush all the way through. Again, the leg of this anchor sandwiches between your block. Your fixed floor anchor is going to be, or sometimes you'll hear it called base anchor. That is standard with all masonry frames. So if you order a masonry frame from us, you will always have a base or fixed floor anchor. This allows another way to anchor this frame into the wall because you can shoot it into the floor. You have your steel stud anchors that are available, of course, for stud applications, steel stud, and then you have your wood stud. Also in our industry, we have a combination or an adjustable type of anchor that will accommodate either wood or metal studs. So that is available also. Existing wall anchor, this will be your application if that wall is up already, block or brick, and say that you're doing a renovation. So they're going to pull out the frames and then they're going to patch up the wall, and now they've got to come in with new frames. You've got to have a way basically to bolt that frame into the wall because it's not new construction. So we punch and dimple the soffit of the frame. This example here on the existing wall is showing you what we call a butterfly anchor, which is more common in our service centers, but we have other types of existing anchors that you can pick from. Adjustable floor anchor, because we always know that every job, the floors will always be level. But in that rare occasion that you have the floors that are not level, we can offer you an adjustable, and it does adjust up and down depending on the floor. And then your mullion types of anchors we have again for your custom types of frames. This slide is just a visualization of the types of anchors, how you see them in the wall. So at the top left, you have it with a wider wall and with the wire or the wire anchor in there, wrapping the wall. The detail right across from it is showing you the same type of frame with a wire anchor, but now it's butted up against the wall, which again allows you to use some more standard jam depth frames. And then your poured concrete or punch and dimple or existing opening anchors, the different types of terminology for it. The block or brick wall is already up and you've got to bolt that frame into the wall. And then your different types of, this one here is showing you the wood stud anchor. With the locations of the anchors, again, each manufacturer will show you where they put the anchors. You follow basically where those hinge cutouts are. Your anchors will be placed very close above or below where your hinge cutouts are, because that's the stress of the weight from the door hanging in and open. So you want to make sure that that frame has good stability to it. Your drywall frame, we see here, this is your true interior slip-on drywall frame. And as I said earlier, it has a compression or plumb anchor there. You'll see at the detail to the left there. In the soffit of the frame, we have that screw. And so you can tighten that compression anchor up against the stud. And then at the bottom of the frame, again, we have countersunk holes that attaches that frame at the bottom. Again, this drywall frame can only, we didn't talk about this much, but this drywall frame can only be fire rated up to 1.5 hours. Masonry frames can be fire rated up to 3 hours. And both of them are provided that you have the proper anchors in that frame. Energy efficient types of frames we have. The curved frame is just another option for you rather than that stick-on weather strip. What we do is we make this frame, we put an indentation in the stop, we supply the weather strip, and it just slides into the pocket. The thermal break frame, we have an old style design you'll see there. I caution you not to use the old style, even though we do have it available. The lead time is insane on this old style. The Mercury frame is the frame that we used in lieu of the old style thermal break frame. It has gone through all of the standard testing as our thermal break old style frame has. It is less expensive. It is easier to install. So again, always reference the Mercury frame when you're looking at a thermal break frame. This, as just an overview, is showing you the various types of ways, both Seco and Curry's, how they prep their frames for hinge cutouts. Again, both companies allows you to use a 4.5-inch standard weight hinge, 0.134, or a 4.5 heavyweight, 0.180 weight hinge in the same hinge cutout. Other than how it's determined is you pop off the plate or you grind down the nubs. In exit devices here, you'll see various types of ways that the frames are prepped. If you have just a surface vertical rod that you're using, we just put a reinforcement in the soffit of the frame to accommodate that surface applied latch. If it's concealed, then we do some more work. We put a box in there so that the latch can be mortised up into the frame header. You'll see it for the double egress. If you're using just a rim exit device, we will also put the reinforcement in the soffit of the frame. And then if you happen to be using a mortised exit device, it accommodates for a standard 4 7/8 strike cutout. Closure reinforcements, these again are going to be your most standard, whether it's parallel arm or regular arm. This is showing you the dimension, showing you where we put the reinforcement. At our service centers, and probably you with your distributors that have their own shop, you'll also probably use the universal sleeve, which is here, which is a half sleeve, or what we call a half sleeve. And that will accommodate either a parallel arm mounted closure or a regular arm closure, which is nice because you don't have to specify that. Just tell us it is a closure reinforcement is going to be used on that opening. Also, we have a full sleeve, and that is the full depth of the frame. Sometimes on heavier doors, wider width doors, whether they're 6.0, 8.0 wide, you may see it specified that they want a sleeve into that frame. And also, it will depend on the type of hardware that is being mounted onto that frame. Here we have flush bolt preps. The traditional ANSI flush bolt is the one that's located onto the left. What is more common is the non-handed flush bolt with commercial frames. And basically what this is a plate and it flips back and forth. With the ANSI flush bolt prep, when you order this type of prep, you have to tell us which side is the inactive. And then what they do is, which side is the active, and then we prep the flush bolt prep on the inactive side of that frame. With the reversible flush bolt or non-handed, it doesn't matter because the plate will flip one way or the other, whether it's right or left, and it's just the ease of being able to install that door and not have to worry about you've got the handing correct. And speaking of handing here, the most thing is you want to always remember that you have to be on your key side. Which way does the door swing? If you're on the key side and the door swings towards you, it will always be a right-hand reverse or left-hand reverse door. If you're on the key side and the door swings away from you, it's always going to be a right-hand door or a left-hand door. In commercial hollow metal, we have 4 different swings for the door. And the reason is not all of the hardware, when we're prepping that door, does all the hardware holes go through both faces of the door at the same location. So we need to know what we call the true swing of that door in order to prep it correctly. And this, I had some issues with this, so I'm not going to show this video, but this is on the SDI website. On there with the videos, if you go to the homepage and towards the right at the top, it'll have a tab for videos. It will show you how to install a masonry frame. It shows you how to install it in either just a standard block wall with wire or T-anchors. Also shows you for an existing opening, how with the punch and dimple process. Also interior application where you have a drywall type of frame. It also walks you through all of those types of videos. So if you have not gone to the website, please go there. There's a lot of good information there for you. And I apologize because, like I said, I tried with that video earlier and it was not working correctly. Our last slide here will show you the various types of organizations, which you're probably familiar with. But again, the one that you'll see day in and day out on your specs is, as far as our doors and frames go, is going to be your SDI, stilldoor.org. Again, it is our resource. Is where a lot of our standards as far as manufacturing our standard doors and frames are housed. Of course, DHI, and then your NFPA 80 is another guideline for us as far as our hollow metal doors and frames as far as fire rating. That's where you'll see in the NFPA 80 located, listed the diameter, if you have a fire rated opening or door in a frame, what's the biggest modification or size that you can do on a fire rated in the field type of door frame, and is a 1-inch diameter hole. Anything other than that, as far as modification of a fire rated frame in the field, has to come back to that distributor, or someone has to be who is licensed to be able to modify that. Your IBC, also your BHMA. So these are different organizations that you'll see day in and day out in the specifications. So with that said, that will conclude our overview of steel frames. And I wanted to check in with Tom if there were any outstanding questions.
Yes, Rose, we did have a couple questions. We'll walk through those, and if anyone else has some questions, you can go ahead and type it into the Q&A and we will address those as well. Rose, the first question, is there a higher cost for galvanneal material?
Yes, there is. You have the cost for cold rolled, and if you look in the price book, whether it's Seco or Curry's, your base price for your hollow metal frame is going to be based off of cold rolled material or CRS. Then you go through and you will have to have an adder, depending on the height, whether it's A60 galvannealed, and then there's another added additional cost or a higher cost if you go to the G90 galvanized material.
Perfect, thank you. We had another question regarding 316 stainless steel. He questioned, will it rust over time, and what life expectancy would you have before it would rust?
Gosh, I don't technically know the life expectancy. That would be something I would have to go back to the factory. Um, Everything basically over time is going to have some issues with it. But with the stainless steel, it is the longest extended as far as rusting goes. Um, if you put any kind of material in a certain environment, you may see some sort of rust. For instance, if you put standard hollow metal frames out in the weather and don't protect it, and there's water and there's rain and whatever, snow and everything else, yes, and it's unprotected, it will rust. Stainless, I would have to definitely, and Tom, if you have that, hopefully they didn't ask the question anonymously, I can go in and find it from the factory on the stainless, what the life expectancy is, either on the 304 or the 316.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
We had a couple more questions.
Okay.
And this is an industry question. Are you seeing more insulation products being specified for exterior frames?
Um, yes. What I see in the industry, and Tom, you can even talk to this also, is that I'm based out of the Pacific Northwest. So we get a teeny tiny bit of rain. So pretty much everything that's exterior application for us, it is specified as A60 galvan annealed material. I have, with my training across the country, have seen different parts of the country that isn't something that they do for exterior. So again, it's going to depend on where you're located, amount of moisture that you're getting. Is it on a coast somewhere with salt water, or if there's a lot of moisture? It really is just going to depend on where it's located. Tom, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
Sure. One of the points he was making is insulating in
Oh,
behind the
insulating.
frames due to
Oh,
energy codes.
oh gosh. The as I haven't seen that. I don't know, Tom, if you've seen the insulation um,
I've
lately
seen it
on that.
specified, but I would think that would be something that's done in the field versus
Mhm.
being done by the manufacturer.
Right. The only thing when you talk about insulation that I think about is STC products, and I apologize because I rambled on with that, and that wasn't the point. But as far as insulation, the only thing that comes to my mind is like you're getting your higher STCs, you have to have that mineral wool in there, and that's how it's tested. But other than that, I don't see it. And again, to Tom's point, most likely it's going to be something that will be directed to be installed in the field and not supplied with the frame.
Thank you. The last question that we had is the use of welded in anchors versus loose. Do we have a recommendation where you'd use one versus the other?
Um, I can tell you what my experience has been. Here in the Pacific Northwest, most of the jobs will have loose anchors. As I travel across the country, especially in the Northeast, I found out that they have a lot of their specs call for that strap anchor to be welded in, just for the fact that on loose anchors, they come in boxes, and you tend to have the job site call you up and says, hey, we don't have any anchors. With the welded in anchor, it is for new construction. The leg of it is bent and positioned into the throat of the frame during transit. And it's a really nice type of anchor because it's welded in. So there's no issues with somebody calling up and says, hey, we just lost 500 anchors and I don't know where they are. And then you're having to reship those. So again, it's going to depend on part of the country. I do know that there are some jobs where distributors will look at that and suggest the welded in anchors just for that fact that you have a lot of material, a lot of anchors. You want to make sure they're in the field when they're ready to install the frames.
Sure. Thank you, Rose. That was the last question that we had. Now would be a good time if you do have any additional questions to type those in.
And again, as we wait a few seconds, just wanted you to remind you that, again, if you wanted a more in-depth deep dive into the standard frames, and then we also have a presentation for doors, please contact your local DSS or your business development person, and we can set something up where we get into this a little bit more in depth with this product. So with that said, if there aren't any more questions, Tom?
We haven't had any additional questions come up.
Great. I would just like to thank you all for attending. Hopefully this has been beneficial for you, and have a great day and stay safe out there. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you all.